Hello, and welcome to the Emily Rassam Show. Today, I am joined by Jeff Hasselman. He is the founder of Kingdom Bitcoin, and also he founded the blockchain and digital asset business for AWS, Amazon Web Services, for those of you who do not know the acronym. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
It's so great to be here, Emily. Looking forward to the conversation.
And I thought, given your topic, that you wouldn't mind if I ask we start with a quick prayer before we get going. Heavenly Father, I want to keep it simple. Give us the eyes to see and ears to hear the truth and what you are speaking to us today and for our listeners as well. Amen.
Amen. Love it. Love it. It's a great way to start.
Jeff, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background. And I saw something about hockey. I'm from the Northeast, so I'm happy to hear a little bit about that too.
Yes, well, maybe we'll start there. So I was born and raised in Minnesota, and when you're born, you're essentially born with ice skates on. So I played hockey all my life and was fortunate to play in college, and then I played briefly. I went to the University of Notre Dame, played there, and then played briefly professionally. So had to get out of it, thankfully, before I lost any teeth. So I still have all those. And once I left hockey, something I've always loved numbers, and it's something God's put on me is numbers. It's a way he talks to me too. So it's one of those things where when I was younger, I would chart like stocks and I'd geek out on things like that. And this is pre-internet. That tells you how old I am. So it was one of those things where just looking at it through that lens. And then as time went on, after I quit playing hockey, I got involved with we were the first non-bank to deploy ATM machines, so cash. And it was just a fun, again, kind of in the financial world, the payment side, different things on that front. Left that, I got into the world of trading. So I was a trader for a little over 10 years. And then I moved to the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and basically Silicon Valley, working with startups, helping out venture-backed companies and doing different things on that front as far as what it was. And then God led me to a tiny little book company called Amazon, where I ended up working for AWS. And a couple months after I got there, one of my favorite lines, because Amazon being a book company, if you see a blank page, be the author, not the reader. And when I took that principle, I actually started thinking, what are we doing for crypto and blockchain? And I ended up creating the business for Amazon back in 2017, was there for 6.5 years, and was very fortunate to see what it turned into. Very humbling to see it become a multi-billion-dollar business for Amazon. And from there, I left, and God put some visions on my head. He said, you need to teach people about what honest money is and what honest scales are as it relates to money. And I just feel Bitcoin is as close as it comes to that. So that would be the tool, but so essentially I created Kingdom Bitcoin, and it's basically educating people on what blockchain technology is, what Bitcoin is, through the lens of God. So I bring scripture into it. I do a lot of things on that. Yeah, it's been a fun journey for me. So yeah, it took me a little bit to get going on that. I will say I kind of disobeyed God a little bit. I didn't do it right away. Had a couple false starts, but now I'm fully in on it. It's been a great journey for me.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. It's always fun to hear how you get started, because it's usually not where you end up.
Very true. Very true.
Yes. And that's another thing I'm really adamant about. I hear all the people telling the college students, have a plan B. And I'm like, well, just follow God's plan, and then it will end up working out for you. I promise.
Oh, I love that. That's exactly right. And that's something I try to pass on to my kids, as far as where they're at that age too, where it's like, hey, put it in God's hands. He's opening and closing the doors for you. It's just follow his lead.
Right. And I was reading something in your notes that you read the Bitcoin white papers in December 2013. I know it came out a little bit before that. It was like right after the big crash that we had here in the States with real estate. Tell us how that impacted your life and what happened in that moment that made you understand this was part of your career path.
Oh, it's a great question. Yeah. So Bitcoin was created for basically Halloween of 2008 is when the white paper came out, and the first transaction took place January 3rd of 2009. So living in the San Francisco Bay Area, obviously it's kind of where a lot of frontier technology, different things that are going on. I came across Bitcoin in December 2013, as you mentioned. I read the white paper, and my background being in the financial world, when I read the white paper, and also having been a trader, I read it and I was like, what is this? Like, and when I read it, I was one of the people where right away I was like, if this works, this will change the world. So it wasn't, I was, a lot of people sometimes read it and they kind of shout it like, oh, there's no way this will work or anything like that. But for me, I saw it, I saw the potential where it was, and I'm curious by nature. So I just started asking questions and meeting people, going out networking. And in February of 2014, I made my first transaction. I bought my first Bitcoin. And then I also was invited to a dinner from a dear friend of mine who I was a banker at the time. I was banking him, and he started this thing called the Bitcoin Supper Club. And there were 50 people, basically a who's who of the entire crypto world. Thinking about that in 2014, I can only imagine what the wealth in that room is today. And we're all in that room, and here I am, a banker, and get up, and he says, "Here's your banker," and I'm like, "I wish I could make you. Unfortunately, my bank won't let me do that." So it was one of those things. So I just went on this journey and started understanding what Bitcoin was all about, what were the principles, what does it mean, and one of the big things for me, just having been in the financial world, when you think about inflation and you think about different things on that, it's a real tax on people, and people don't understand that. So like getting to understand what that looks like. Something I often say is like Benjamin Franklin had two lines he always said: "There's death and there's taxes." If Benjamin Franklin was living today, there'd be a third, and the third would be money printing, and that's an addiction that America has. So, and I'm the biggest fan of America. I love everything that we have, everything about our country, what we can do, the freedoms that we have, and everything in that. I just feel there's some issues with the way we operate our money and what goes on with that. And one of the things with Bitcoin that I see is the inflation is not there because there will only be 21 million tokens ever created, and that's the heart of the white paper. Besides the technology, I wouldn't want to bore your listeners to all the technology, but it's one of those things where that's where I can help educate you on that, simplify those terms for you.
Right.
But it's one of those things.
So I thought, since we are on this topic, that you could explain the difference between our current banking system, which is like creature of Jekyll Island, print money at hominem whenever you want.
Yes.
And then the limiting quantities of Bitcoin. And I'm sure you're aware of this, that money printing is not a new thing. It even happened during the Civil War. I remember reading quite a few books about that. It's not a new thing at all. And back in the day, they used to skip town on their defunct currency. Now you can't really skip town as everything's digital.
Yes.
Can you tell the listeners a little bit about the differentiation between the finite quantities and the unlimited quantities and how that works in our current banking system?
Sure. Yeah. So that's one. It's great that you brought up Jekyll Island. I was there back in March, so I was actually in the room where the Federal Reserve was actually created. So it's kind of a neat experience for me, kind of being in that room. But essentially, when you think about the U.S. dollar and how it's created, what goes on, what's in it, I'll give all the listeners a stat. Since 2020, the U.S. has printed 40% of the dollars we've ever created. So in the last 5 to 6 years, 40% of the dollars ever created in the history of the United States have been created in those last 6 years. What does that mean? So people are kind of like, oh, I have no clue. So that's essentially where the inflation part comes in, where instead of your groceries or your eggs costing X, it's now 2 or 3 times what it was. And it's one of those things where it's the part that gets really hard for people to understand is when you think about inflation, it's obviously measured in a percentage, but as that percentage moves up, it doesn't really go back down. So that's the problem with how we're printing it. And it's like, yes, now we move up to another level. And then once the inflation comes more, if we print more money, that number will go even higher. So it continues to move like that. So when you think about US dollars and Jekyll Island, when the Federal Reserve was created, there was a central authority that was kind of understanding how much money do we need to run the U.S. government? How do we need to keep the trains running and keep the lights on, if you will, as far as what that looked like. And as time went on, 1971 came along, and basically President Nixon at the time made the decision to get us off the gold standard. And that is really what really changed a lot for how this money printing, this whole thing really took off. And you are correct that it did happen during the Civil War, and there's definitely a lot of stories and a lot of things about that. But the true money printing, as far as where it really had economic impact at the biggest levels across our entire country, started in 1971. And since that date, I mean, the amount of debt, if you look at the charts where it's kind of like, and I'm a chart person, so not to bore and go too geeky on with your listeners, it's pretty much a straight line. And then all of a sudden, 1971, it just goes straight up and to the right to obviously to today and what I just gave you as far as what's happened in the last 5 years. So what that is that, I mean, we're creating all these different things. The U.S. debt has become so large. Right now, we're just over $39 trillion with a T. And that number was very low back in 1971. So it's like, just think of what that is. But to service the debt, so when we issue bonds to help pay for the U.S. government, there's an interest rate that we have to pay. And by servicing that debt, it actually costs more than what we pay for the department, what's now called the Department of War, used to be the Department of Defense, as well as a few other departments all combined. And it's like just the debt alone is what's costing that. And if we continue to print money, this is something that in 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now, are we going to be able to print any more money? And that's where it just becomes very concerning as to how we're operating. And when you think about our kids, Emily, it's like, are we kicking the can down to our kids and our kids' kids as far as what's kind of going on and what the ramifications are going to be down the road when it comes to the United States? And it's not just the U.S. This is all around the world. It's the U.S. is not the only one that's doing this. It's all around the world where countries have this issue and have this problem where they're
right. And it's essentially like a way to almost game the system. And I noticed in your papers then you are comparing Bitcoin to this. Can you explain how Bitcoin is different?
Yes. So like when you look at Bitcoin relative to the US government, so one thing I'll say is I'll pose a question to the audience, like, when was the last time the US government did an audit on the US dollar? That question is unanswerable. We don't know. When was the last time? We have no idea. When was the last time that the US government actually audited Fort Knox and the gold that we hold? Again, that's an unknown question as far as how we look at it. And then I bring Bitcoin in, and I will say this, Bitcoin is one of these things, it's a new technology. It's not perfect, and I'm not one of the people, I will never say put all your money in Bitcoin. That is not something, that's not what I advocate. But what I do say is it's something to understand how that money has been created and what goes on. So when you think about the US dollar, you have basically the governments making decisions. So the Federal Reserve, different people have aspects of what they can do to move interest rates, change it to say game the system, if you will. Whereas in Bitcoin, there's only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be created. And one thing I will say to everyone out there, yes, 21 million doesn't sound like a lot, but the key is it goes to the decimal point 8 spots to the right. So it's really much greater than that as far as when you think about how it can be divided up. It's not like you can only have one, but each Bitcoin can be divided up by out to 8 decimal points to the right. So just to give you a sense of what that means. But what I'm saying with 21 million, there will never be 22 million, 23, they won't print more. And that right there just tells you that the inflation question goes out the window. So it's the supply and demand, just basic economics when it comes down to what that looks like, what goes into it, how that works. And the way Bitcoin operates is there is not a third party that's in the middle controlling all the levers. It's software that operates, and it's basically you and I transacting between one another. Either you have the Bitcoin or you don't, and let's say you wanted to pay me for some service or whatever it might be. If you have it, it is audited every 10 minutes. So it's like every 10 minutes there's an audit that's taken care of. It becomes more and more secure every 10 minutes as far as how that operates, and everything is public. So every transaction is on the public blockchain. It doesn't mean it tells exactly what you and I transacted. It just talks about the dollars the Bitcoin that were exchanged for that transaction, and it moves forward on that. So it's one of those things where governments cannot influence the actual movement of Bitcoin. They can actually stop it. They can do that if the country decides to do that, and that has happened in some regards. But Bitcoin will not go away because of that. It doesn't matter because it'll work around and go to other countries like it has. So it's like this is a global currency that it's just really. It's a neat way of how to look at it in a much cleaner system than when you think about the U.S.
Right. I wanted to clarify something for anyone listening. 8 decimal points to the right should be, what is that, 10 million pie slices per Bitcoin?
Exactly.
Okay.
So if you slice out one Bitcoin, it can go that far out as far as where it is. So, and there's actually talk about changing the terminology. There's this thing called Satoshis, which takes it out to that where one Satoshi is like 1/100 millionth of a Bitcoin.
As far as from my science background, I know that is very confusing for most people, any kind of things with decimal points. So
yes.
10 million slices of pie. per
Yeah.
Bitcoin.
It's a great analogy.
Everyone knows this.
Yes.
And let's see, what is something that the smartest institutions in the world understand about Bitcoin right now that everyday families do not?
A great question. So maybe I'll just kind of go back just a little bit. So like the evolution of Bitcoin and blockchain and cryptocurrencies in general, it's when you really get down to the heart of it, it's a very young industry as far as where it's at. So we had our what I call our kid stage, like when we were kids, we were curious, we learned things here and there, and then we became adolescents and we made some errors, made some mistakes, and in Bitcoin and in crypto, there have been fraudulent activities, but it's not the technology, it's the people behind it. So similar to anything in the world, I mean, banks have had this problem. I mean, lots of different things that's taken place. But now the adults have come into the room, and this is something where the adults have been there, but the U.S. has been a little bit behind as far as how we've approached it. We've taken kind of a hands-off approach, and sadly, a lot of the people that were building this space left the U.S. to go to other parts of the world to build because the regulation was proper as far as it was open, and it was. I mean, crypto has always asked for regulation. So what's the sandbox we're playing in? It's like, just give us a sense of what that is. And now we're finally getting to a point where that's starting to happen. So the biggest banks in the world, and I've worked very closely with them when I was at Amazon, I know the thousands of people that are working on these different things across all the banks across the world. It's actually, the number is insane how many people are working on it because they know the plumbing of their industry is changing. Just because of what this is, it's a lot more efficient. It's way easier to move money. Like when you and I send a wire, let's say we wanted to send a wire to a friend that lives in Europe. It could take 2, 3, 4, 5 days. Who knows? And how many hands touch that? So how many people are getting a fee? What's kind of taking place? Whereas if you send Bitcoin, you know within 10 minutes that person has it. So those transactions take place. It's verified. It's there. You know, there's no chargeback. There's no fraud as far as what happened. It moved. You just got to make sure you have the exact wallet that it's going to the proper way. And that's one thing that scares people a little bit when it comes to Bitcoin. So that said, it's just one of those things where it's very, like, as the technology has grown and where it is, those large banks, and now it's beyond the banks. There's more than that. You have insurance companies, you have media companies, you have a lot of people that are doing different things. And now you actually have companies, instead of holding US dollars in their treasury to spend and pay their employees, they actually hold Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies that are out there.
That is true.
Yeah, when you're talking about these large institutions, they understand just how money is being moved and what's going on, and just because there's so many people coming into it. Initially, Bitcoin was really looked at like, you know what, this is nothing. Don't pay attention to it. But then it continued to grow, and we started seeing other countries start to adopt it. So the El Salvadors of the world, like I actually helped the country of El Salvador accept Bitcoin and also give their digital wallets to all their citizens as far as what goes into that. So now citizens of El Salvador have Bitcoin and doing certain things. So these larger banks are starting to understand, oh, okay, we see where this is going. It may not be ready in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, at least at the prime time level where 8 billion people are using it, but it is going that way just because of the way the technology operates. And that's the thing where I think the person who's working their job and taking care of their family and doesn't really understand what Bitcoin is, similar to how you and I send an email to each other, 99.9% of the world have no clue how that happens. It just happens. This is what's going to happen with blockchain technology. That is going to be the same thing where it's going to be the underlying engine of how money is moved, how transactions take place, and the way that operates. And most people won't really understand how that works from a technology standpoint. It just will do it. And that's the beauty where I try to help the builders that make that a lot easier. I will be the first to say that it's not as easy as it needs to be right now, but it will be. And that's what the banks understand that. They see that, they know where this is going. They know how fast technology grows in this day and age. And that's something where they're trying to get ahead of that, to where that regular person who's serving dinner to their family right now is thinking, I don't really understand Bitcoin. I don't get it. And that's where the banks are at.
That makes sense. So except in Silicon Valley, going elsewhere, when you talk to people who are like the heads of companies and et cetera, how is the consensus feeling for you as far as adoption of this blockchain technology? As I know, I've gotten a mixed set of emotions from just about everyone I have spoken with.
Yes, I will say there's a few things that are wrong with our industry. One, there's millions of tokens that are out there. So it's not like there's one or two of these tokens. And when I say it's like Bitcoin and other different types of versions of Bitcoin. So I should say other cryptocurrencies.
Cryptos, yeah.
There's millions of cryptocurrencies that are out there, and that's something that is unfortunate because I would say 99.9% of those are the scammy, fraudulent, meme coin, that type of an idea of what's kind of going on. Where is there actual utility behind it, and is the person who's behind it, the group of people behind it, what are their intentions? And in a lot of cases, it is nefarious, and that is one of the black eyes that we do have in our industry, and we're working very hard to clean that up. And again, that's not just here in the U.S. This is a global phenomenon as far as where that is. So there's so many different things that are taking place each and every day on that front, and that is something that does need to get cleaned up. So that's something where I've worked really hard. I've spent a lot of time in Washington D.C. educating our senators, our congressmen and women, as far as what are we doing, how are we setting this up. And then I do this also around the world. So I've been in the Middle East, I've been in Asia, I've been in Latin America. So you go right on down the line. There's so many places where how are we looking at where this is at and what goes into that. So that's something that our industry does need to clean up to make sure that we gain the trust of what people are doing, what they're doing. And I will say this is outside of the Bitcoin world. These are other tokens that are out there as far as where it is. That said, there are a number of tokens that are definitely in play that are very heavy utility. They're doing some very interesting things as far as how they're moving money and helping commerce or helping people make payments in different parts of the world and cross payments as far as what's happening on that front. So there are a number that are definitely doing well, but this is one of those things where if you're not in the world, you probably are going to have a lot harder time understanding, is this fraudulent? Is it not fraudulent? What's going on? And what part of what Kingdom Bitcoin's job is to do is help educate people on just what this is. Where can you get those insights? And if you're looking to invest in something or in a particular coin, how do you really estimate and understand what is this? Is this something that could turn sideways, or is this something that actually has utility and there are people that are using it in the right way? When I say people, it's probably companies or industries or different things that are leveraged.
So do you see, speaking of globally, do you see this being a major factor in energy trade going forward within the next decade or so?
Energy is definitely a big part of, especially the Bitcoin world. And that's sometimes where some people say that Bitcoin uses too much energy and so forth as far as that is. Well, it's actually, that argument to me is very flawed. Yes, Bitcoin does use a lot of energy, but the beauty of that is that's what protects it. That's what helps secure it. And the reason for that is it's the biggest computing network in the world that's securing the money and securing what Bitcoin actually does. And that's why you have that 10-minute audit. So what's taking place is you have every 10 minutes, there's a mining reward that comes up, and it takes energy and compute power to actually solve a math equation. It comes down to math. Who wins that ends up getting a reward and then places another block onto the chain, hence the term blockchain. So that is where the energy comes in. So yes, energy certainly plays a role in that. And even in the other cryptocurrencies that have gone away from what's called they're using something called proof of stake versus proof of work, where energy is a lot less consumptive as far as what goes on. However, there's other factors that come into those tokens that you lose that. There are middle people that can get involved, different things on that. So it changes the economics of what happens with those tokens. So again, this is one of those topics where are you at the 101 level or the 401 level? It's like there's varying degrees as far as where that is, but it's certainly one of those things to understand that. But from a Bitcoin standpoint, yes, it definitely plays a role in the energy as to what's going on and the different types of energy. So one thing I'll add on that, Emily, is that it's close to 75% of all transactions that take place in the Bitcoin, in that ecosystem, are all renewable energy. It's energy that would have gone to waste, but is now being used in a different way to help secure the entire blockchain and what's taking place with Bitcoin. And that number goes up each and every month.
Right. And another way I was actually thinking of energy was like fossil fuel trade, because we are on the US dollar for that trade right now. So Bitcoin is honest money. Walk me into the biblical principles of stewardship that I have heard you speaking about in regard to blockchain technology and the theology behind.
Yes. So and again, God is a real big part of my life as far as where things are, and He gave me vision to what is it that what do you need to do to help educate people around us? So when you start thinking about Proverbs 11:1, and you think about dishonest scales and what that actually means, if you go back to the time of Jesus, and even in those times where there would be gold bars and people would shave a little bit of gold off, or there would be basically sand dollars or different items that were used to trade as far as what was used as currency. And it wasn't an honest scale. Someone would take a little bit off of it, and it was like, who's actually in control of this? Who's understanding what that is? And over time, it really changed just how things were looked at. And could you trust the actual dollar? Could you trust that particular instrument as far as what it was from a monetary standpoint? But when you think of Bitcoin, there is none of that. There's none of that shaving, none of that takes place. So one thing that I've said this and I've written about this a lot, where I honestly think that God created Bitcoin. And the reason for it was because of this. We needed to find an honest money to what was taking place because of what has been going on in the world. As we talked about before, when you're thinking about how much US dollars can get printed and what that taxes on you as an individual paying in dollars and what that looks like. So that is certainly a big component of how I look at it. And one thing that I love to say is that Bitcoin, it's not a rebellion, it's a repentance. And the reason why I say it's a repentance on what money is and what that looks like. And that's where I really go deep into what that looks like and how that brings those biblical principles into it. We can go right on down the line. You think about the parable of the talents and think about a lot of different things. What are we doing to steward our money and how do we look at that? And that's where I feel Bitcoin's a great thing because many people out there think that Bitcoin and crypto is like a get rich quick thing. Yes, people have done that, but that is not the purpose of it. This is a generational item, and where you look at it, and when you think about the economics of how I laid it out before, that when you think about your children's children's children, what's going on, what's being passed on from generation to generation, Bitcoin will be there, whereas the US dollar, I'll give you an example. And I'm going a little bit on a tangent, but I'll give you an example. The game of Monopoly was created in 1935, and it cost $2. So $2 in 1935. Because of inflation and because of how much money we've printed since 1935, that $2 is essentially the purchasing power of that is a nickel. And I don't know what you can buy for a nickel today. Not very much. I don't even think you can get gumballs anymore for that as far as what that looks like. But the play money in that Monopoly game is actually worth $400 as an asset because it's a collector's item. So think about what the US dollar did to buy that game versus the actual play money in Monopoly of what it became more valuable than the US dollar. So it's very fascinating to see what's gone on as we look at it. And that's where I bring the biblical principles in to kind of educate people on where this is. And that's why I do feel that God created Bitcoin.
And so I then wanted to ask you, I really liked your article where you were talking about the peer-to-peer revelation of God's truth and stewardship, and specifically on the white paper. Can you tell us, I know you said that you feel God speaking to you with numbers, how this happens in your life, because I know God speaks in a still small voice and it's different for everyone. What did you hear, or etc.?
Yes, love it. Yeah, so God gives me visions. When I was a little kid, and again, we mentioned that I played hockey. So the 1980 Olympic hockey team, when they won the gold medal, it's kind of cool that the U.S. won again this year. But when you think about the 1980 Olympic team, I was a 7-year-old hockey player, youth hockey player growing up, and it was just a massive thing in my life that ultimately, literally a week before it happened, God gave me a vision that the U.S. was going to, and it was one of those things where I didn't know what that meant. I had no clue anything. But then my hockey career took off, and actually the best player on that team later became my professional hockey coach. And then the son of the head coach of that team, Herb Brooks, his son and I are good friends. So it's like I grew up in Minnesota, so there's a lot of ties to that. But throughout life, God has given me visions. And when I started thinking about Kingdom Bitcoin, God gave me this vision of a lion. That's why my logo is a lion. You'll see that. And it was like a lion that was breathing. So I was leaving Amazon, and trust me, that 6.5 years, it was very intense as far as building this business out, what's gone on. And I kept seeing this nose of a lion, and it was like breathing, telling me to breathe, slow down, think through. And then I started getting these numbers, and then different things as far as educate. And the term, like I would see a chalkboard, I would see different things as far as that goes. So it's like, how do you educate people on what honest money is? I would see scales, different parts on that. So I started taking these together. And when I get these visions, when I was a kid, I would never ask very many questions. I figured I should know it all, but thankfully I got out of that habit and started asking questions. So like when these happen, I'll start talking to God. I mean, just what does that mean? Or why is the lion going up and to the right? Or why is he breathing? Or why is he breathing heavier? Or what's going on? Or what does that number mean? Or show me a different number that give me a sign on those types of things. So that's the way God communicates with me, and it's just so powerful when I dial into that and then really obey kind of what's going on and listening to it. And that's where like the clarity comes, and I feel like I'm in a much better place, no matter what's going on in my life or anything that's taking place. I could feel God talking to me. And that's one of the big ways he does is through those visions. And then for me, it's just praying. Like every day I pray and building that relationship with God. I was raised Catholic, but then later in life, I mean, I love the Catholic Church, especially when it comes to communion and certain things about it. But there were certain things I just wasn't getting with God. It was like, how do I build a relationship with him, and where does that go? And there were certain things that happened in my life that led me on that journey to where I am here today, and I continue to learn each and every day as far as that journey and what the Bible, because I mean, at the end of the day, the Bible is probably the greatest business book ever written. If you study it in those terms and you look at it through that lens, there's so many great things about what the Bible teaches you about business principles and obviously just my principles as a human being.
Right. I agree with that. And so what does it look like for you when you are spending time with God and talking? How do you find time to do that? Do you
Yeah,
have like anything special that you do?
that's a great question because it's one of those things that you have to make time, and that's my
Right.
one thing is like I literally have it on my calendar. Like there's one thing where I just block, never have anything going. I'm a weird person where I wake up no matter what time I go to bed, I will wake up at 4:30 to 5 o'clock every single day. So my first thing I do when I wake up is I'm praying, and usually what happens is when I'm at home or even when I'm traveling, most ceilings are white. And whenever I have a white space, that's where I start seeing things. So it's like a lot of time, and it doesn't happen every day when I wake up, but that's my quiet time is when I'm praying in the morning, just with God and so forth. And when my wife wakes up, we always pray together to start our day. That's a big thing for both of us, what's going on for that day. And just that essentially we're giving our schedule to God, and he can show us where we're going, what's happening, what doors should we close, what should we open, where do we say yes, where do we say no. And we can't, like, the decisions we make in our life are always asking that question, like, is this is this is this a God thing or is this something else? And it's like, and that's something that we really stick to as much as we can. And there's sometimes where I'm not perfect on that, but and usually it comes back to bite me when I don't do that. So it's like God playing a little trick on me, like, hey, come on, get back into what's going on. So for me, that early morning and then right before bedtime, I try to wind down my day so that it helps me sleep at night, but it's also having that conversation with God. Thank you for what happened during the day, and then also what's set up for the next day or what's ahead. What are some of the bigger things that are going on in our life? And then a big thing that we always do is who we're praying for. We have our prayer group, like a list of people that we're praying for. Either they're going through a hardship or they might be looking for a promotion or whatever it might be. There's a lot of different reasons that we're praying for the people that we just love in our life.
I love that. And I have a question, just personal one. Did you have a harder time doing that when you had little kids? Because I used to be so good with like hearing God, and then everything got crazy when I had toddlers at home.
Yes.
Was there
What I will say, like the early morning was still good, even though, I mean, that window got a little bit tighter. But I will say, as they got older, it became harder at night because they stayed up later. So the
right?
earlier they went to bed, that gave me more time at the end of the night to do what I needed to do as far as what was going on. So that part of it, that was interesting, just that evolution. And especially like with your kids being younger, mine being older, having gone through that. And my kids are incredible. I love them to death. And I've been blessed where it's been such an amazing run with my kids as far as who they are, what they're doing. But it's like, as they were staying up later than me at some point. So I'm like, what? It's like,
Oh yeah.
and that is the thing where how do you make sure you you look at it through that lens. And also, when I was working at Amazon, I'll give you this example. When I was working at Amazon, I would be doing calls all around the world. So my times of calls that I would be getting on were really weird. So I had to block that off in my calendar. That's why I use that trick, just so that, hey, this is my time. I need to do it and be very disciplined, stick to it. Now, sometimes a child will come up and ask you a question or do something like that, and I will stop prayer to take care of my child, not to like, hey, give me like 5 minutes. Like, no, I'll take care of what's going on. But then I'd add it on at the end. So it's one of those things where I definitely made sure that I stayed very disciplined with those windows. And then throughout the day, I mean, if I'm driving, if I'm whatever it might be, there might be moments where even if, as crazy as this sounds, as you're walking to the restroom or something like that, a prayer can be as short as 5 seconds. It doesn't have to be a long drawn out thing, but it's one of those things where I'm constantly trying to, and that helps me recenter myself. That's a real key tool as far as how my faith is growing. It's just by staying engaged with God.
Right. And you mentioned that you grew up Catholic. That's one of the things I love about the Catholic Church. I have a Catholic prayer app. I'm like, they wrote this out for me, so I don't have to think of all the words. And I save them on my phone, and I'm like, okay, now is the time.
Yeah.
That is one thing I really appreciate. So we have talked about the strengths and weaknesses of Bitcoin. And I wanted to ask you a question that I hear a lot is the threat. I hear a lot of people concerned about being able to have the money supply shut off or doing without because something has happened. Like this, like essentially similar to the social credit score system. What do you have to say about that concern that I hear a lot of people having?
Yeah, I'd say from a Bitcoin standpoint, as far as that type of a threat, as far as it shutting down, the entire internet would have to shut down, and it would have to shut down for a long time. So, and if it did, you can always, once it came back up, you could revert back to when it did shut down and go. And that's actually kind of written in the code. So there's certain parts about that where that does not concern me at all from Bitcoin standpoint. Other cryptocurrencies, yes, that is an issue. That is definitely an issue. And that's something and again, for people that are just looking to maybe invest in certain cryptocurrencies, you really need to understand what the economics are behind that and what questions to ask, what to look for. I mean, AI definitely helps in a lot of those areas, I will say, but it's one of those things where what are the questions that you need to ask to understand that? So that is certainly something. One area that gets a lot of attention on the Bitcoin side is quantum computing and what takes place on that. And quantum is definitely something that, yeah, it can be considered a threat, especially as Bitcoin has evolved and grown up and as a technology and what's going on. So Satoshi Nakamoto, who created Bitcoin, has never, ever made a transaction, never, ever sold one Bitcoin, ever traded it or done anything. But that wallet could be vulnerable to quantum just because of what's happened, how the wallets have gotten much better in the 17 years that Bitcoin has been around. So that is an area where there is certainly some things, but we're right now, and again, this goes deep into the weeds for people who don't understand Bitcoin. It is one of these things where these proposals are put forward to say, hey, if we're looking to do this, what do we need to strengthen? How do we look at that and what goes on? And this has to be voted on by everyone in the system as far as what's taking place and what's going on. So there is no one or two people that lead the whole charge as far as what that looks like. And the majority of those, nearly every proposal gets shot down just because it doesn't stay true to what Bitcoin is all about. So there are some things about quantum, but one thing is, and quantum's moving fast. It definitely is. But the way that Bitcoin is moving and the security around it or what's taking place, to be able to break in, quantum computers would go after a bank and the banking system much faster than it would go after Bitcoin. Just because, one, there's a lot more money there, and two, it'll be probably a lot easier to break than it will be for Bitcoin.
Have you been down to the lab in Orange County?
I have actually. I have. I've been to.
I haven't yet.
And it's quite a spot. There's a few places that I've been to that are doing different projects around that too. So it's just, for me, I get a kick. I just love technology and people that are trying to kind of be as on the edge as possible. And that to me is so fun just to kind of see and understand. So that's the nerd in me, I guess. But yes.
Right. I like to think I'm a total novice, but I try to ask good questions.
Yeah, you
try
do.
to ask
You're
good questions.
You're asking phenomenal questions.
Yes. Well, that's what I always prayed. I was like, God, please make me good at asking questions because I don't know anything. Or at least I like to think I don't know anything, because there's always more to learn.
Yes.
And so I was thinking then, you read the Bitcoin white paper in 2013, thought it was interesting, and you made this change. Why do you see this as a good thing for your
My,
children and children's children or
uh,
like future generations?
yeah. So one thing, and I won't share like kind of how I approach Bitcoin, but one thing I will say, and I've shared this publicly, I've never sold a Bitcoin in my life. So it's one of those things where I'm just accumulating it. And I kind of clued in very early on, like what that looked like. But as time has gone on, and now as I've started to bring scripture into this and understand what that looks like, I'm trying to think of different ways of what am I trying to put into my kids, and how do and when I say that, I use the word "in" on purpose. So it's not what are the assets, like when I pass away, what assets am I passing on to my kids? Is it okay, it's Bitcoin, it's a house, it's this or that. I don't look at it through that lens. What I'm trying to do is pass into them what have I learned, what's going on, so that they can then take those things that I've put inside of them to then go and put more seeds out there and look at it through that lens. So God's given me the ability to kind of see around corners and really think in 300 and 400 years. So it's one of those things where I'm planting. I look at it as not just mustard seeds. I look at it as orchards of mustard seeds, like what's being planted today that someone 300 and 400 years ago, and I think really big. When someone touches the things that are being created today by, say, myself or so many countless people that are building and doing things, and hopefully my kids and their kids, like as that goes on, when someone touches us in 3 or 4 years, where are we going to be as a world and what's gone on? And it's going to blow my mind. And that's the part that I look forward to. But if you don't plant those seeds today, there's no foundation. There's no cornerstone as to how you look at what's going on and what's taking place. And that at the core of that is always God. So it's like, what are you doing to kind of set that up? So that's what I'm trying to instill in my kids, not just pass on to my kids.
Well, and I actually have a jar of mustard seeds on my desk behind me,
Woohoo!
like a full jar of them, just in case.
Love that.
And I one thing that as a parent I always think of is, yes, I want to pass knowledge on to my children and these skills that you can instill in them while they're young. But one thing I see or foresee with AI is that things can get lost in the noise. And do you think that as a parent, you're passing on these biblical truths because they will not be passed by with all the noise and the let me say, extra verbose writing that we don't need?
Yes. Such
Uh,
it's such a great question, and it's something that is very close to my heart. Is just being in the technology world, and I mean, AI is not a new phenomenon. AI has been around for a long time. But now it's just where are we? It's just moving so fast. What are we doing? The different things that are taking place. You look at like what the Pope wrote in his first encyclical about AI and what took place on that. You look at like what Anthropic's done. Some other companies have done some very interesting things. Just so everyone knows, Anthropic actually has a team that is on the theology side, and they're looking at certain things that are taking place and what's going on. The question is, are they going hard enough? Where is it going? How do our kids, when they're looking at that, and how are they being educated? I mean, at the end of the day, what's going into their minds, and what does that look like? So that's near and dear to my heart. So there's certain things that I'm working on that not public yet, but different things of what we're trying to do to like, okay, how do you bring Christian values to that world, and not just to the world of AI, but to everything as far as how are we looking at that, to where when we're thinking, when you're going to make a purchase or you're going to find a job or go to a school or do different things, how are you thinking about that as God at the core of that decision, and what does that look like? So that's something that means it's very dear to myself, and just what a number of people that I'm working very closely with, that we just I'm in rooms that I should never be in. Let me just be completely blunt. Like some of these people of what they've accomplished and what they've done, the way they're thinking about this is like, what can we do to help bring this to the rest of the world, so that we're seeing that, And that's something that doesn't happen overnight, but it's again, it goes right back to what's on your desk, those mustard seeds. You need to plant them. And how do you get that in there to where it is impact? Like our kids, as young as they are, I mean, they're creatures of habit. And what are the habits that we're creating in them that will lead them and keep them close to God, but then also to help build his kingdom?
Right. And I completely agree with that. And like one thing I will say, since you are in the Silicon Valley area, in the rest of the United States, I get the feeling that people think of Bitcoin and blockchain technology as kind of like, and quantum computing in general as a unicorn. And it's really not a tangible thing yet
Right.
for much of the US, like as far as understanding. So how have you seen, have there been any campaigns or et cetera to help explain this more other than what you have here
Yeah,
with
I mean, so
Kingdom
definitely where
Bitcoin?
that's one thing that I'm trying to do, but there are certainly a number of places where you can go. And what I will say is even just the traditional banks and like financial houses where if you have like a brokerage account or things like that, there's a lot of educational tools on those. And I'm not talking about the crypto exchanges, which those all have fantastic spots where you can go look at. I mean, the Coinbases of the world, the Krakens of the world, there's a lot of those types of places where you can get information. But the traditional, the TradFis, if you will, the traditional banks, the traditional brokerage houses, they are getting a lot more astute and educating people on that. So there's really good, and it's not like they're going to take you way deep in the weeds right away. They will give you a good basis as to what's going on, what's understanding. And again, it's from their perspective. So certain things, and you're starting to see now where banks are saying anywhere from 1 to 5% of your assets should be in cryptocurrency. So it's things on that front where they're actually making that comment. Whereas 3, 4, 5, 10, 17 years ago, that wouldn't even been a blip on the radar. And it's just showing you where things are kind of moving. So that's something where how do you get to the mainstream? I mean, today, at the end of the day, there's 8 billion people in the world. There's like 500 million wallets. So, and I have multiple wallets, so that takes that number down. So when you start thinking of how many people are actually involved in this, it's still very small. So a lot of people make the comment, "Well, I missed this whole crypto thing. I'm out." It's like, nope, it's still you're in the like. To use a hockey analogy, we're singing the national anthem before the game. So the pregame skates happen, the national anthem's being sung right now and the game's about to start. And that's where, because now the adults are in the room. So we got a long ways to go as far as what that looks like. And I mean, one thing I always make that comparison to what the internet is. This is 1997 internet and Google hasn't even been created yet. So just to give you a sense of where we're at.
I'm just hearing the dial tone right now. Yes. Yes, I had that for a long time. And so I like to end my show. First of all, thank you for sharing your wisdom with what is the best piece of advice you've ever received.
Best piece, without question, there's two pieces I'll say to this. One is how do you always expand your comfort zone? Like, what are you doing to expand your comfort zone? This is something that was taught to me very early in my hockey career as far as how fast you skate, but I've applied it to my life to where what are you doing to always challenge yourself? And it's like, I actually ask my kids this question and they roll their eyes a lot. But I feel in 15, 20 years, they're not going to be rolling their eyes. It's like, what challenged you today? And the more you push yourself, the more you're going to grow. So that's number one. And then the biggest one for me, this is something I share with my wife. She's a TV personality. She works on TV and is a commentator. And anytime she goes on TV, I just tell her two words: be you. And the reason for that is be your authentic self. If you're that and you keep learning, you keep growing, there's no one, I mean, that's how God made you. So always be you.
Right? I love that. And I really love that. And then I like to ask, what is your favorite book that you like to share that you did not write?
Yeah, number one is the Bible, and then beyond that, I would say one that I love sharing right now is Gradually Then Suddenly. It's by Mark Batterson, and Mark and I have gotten to know each other pretty well. But it's one of those things where just you do things little by little, and then all of a sudden, suddenly things take off. So it's like it's just a great book, and it's something that people should. I can't write. He writes a book every year, so it's like so many of them, but that is a great book for people to look at.
That is really impressive because it takes a lot for me to write a book.
Yes.
Well, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me today. It has been very enlightening, and I hope my audience has learned something new. I know I have. And do you have any questions for me before we finish up? And do you have anyone you can think of that you would recommend for me to reach out to
Yeah,
have on the show?
no questions. Happy to promote whenever you're ready on it, as far as whatever I need to do to and bring more people your way. And then, I mean, as far as people, yeah, that's a great question. Let me think on that. I'll send you one or two.
Sure.
This might make the most sense, and then something that's completely different than what I do, stuff like that. That might be very interesting for the people that are watching. So let me think on that. I'll send you a note.
I I would be really honored if you would share anybody.
Well, Emily, thanks so much for your time, and I really
Thank you.
appreciate the way you prepared for it and the way you did the questions. So let me put I'll put together some names for you, and we'll go from
I
there.
would much appreciate it.